Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are in the country of Canada. Thank you very much for attending our Civil 3D Performance webinar. Join me and my esteemed colleagues, Richard Johnson and Dave Hill. I will be the presenter today. Richard and Dave will be answering your questions. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them, but use the questions pane in the webinar panel, please. Feel free to use the chat window to chat amongst your peers and colleagues. You'll also notice in the webinar panel a handouts pane. I'm providing the PowerPoint file that you'll be seeing today, so feel free to click on that button to download the PowerPoint file. And so if everybody's ready to go, we're going to continue. So this session is going to be recorded. Once it's been processed, we'll place it up on our YouTube channel and Facebook. And so feel free to go there and watch the video afterwards. When you download the PowerPoint file, you'll notice that there's links in there as well, both to YouTube and our Facebook channel as well. And I'll be referring to a few web pages during this webinar, so the links to those web pages will be in the PowerPoint. So if you download the PowerPoint, you're going to have access to those links. So just a bit about myself before we get started here. My name is Matt Kohlberg. I've been with Cancel since about 2006, and my primary role here is supporting my customers with the Autodesk infrastructure products, Civil 3D, of course, being one of them, InfraWorks, Recap, Map 3D, AutoCAD. I worked in production for 13 years before coming to Cancel, and so it's my job here at Cancel to provide my customers with the tools and the skills that they need to perform their designs and their jobs to the best of their ability. So Civil 3D Performance. We have quite a few registrants. Right now it looks like we have about 114 people logged in, so thank you. It's a very good turnout. There are going to be a couple of poll questions. You'll see those when I pop those up. So let's get started. I like to group, when I talk about Civil 3D Performance, I like to group them into three different buckets: hardware, software, and technique. Of course, hardware, you can just throw $1,000 at a machine, you can throw $10,000 at a machine. You know, how much is that going to give you? How much difference are you going to notice with your Civil 3D Performance? So, I mean, typically more expensive and higher end machines are going to give you better performance. How much better? It depends on the machine you get. We'll talk a little bit more about hardware. In fact, all three of these things a little bit later. Software, updates, service packs, display drivers, hardware acceleration, settings to do with AutoCAD, what antivirus are you using, and even Windows settings. All of these affect your Civil 3D Performance. Finally, technique. So, you know, where do you store your files? How do you organize your DWGs? Are you using old features that maybe are redundant now? Are you using optimized Civil 3D styles? And are you simplifying your data? If the only thing you get from this feedback, or if you have to leave early, the best bang for your buck in terms of Civil 3D Performance is what I have rectangled in red here. Technique, workflow, if you can nail that down, you're going to get the best performance of Civil 3D. I have one thing highlighted under software, and that's updates, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. That's actually a fairly recent development. I didn't circle hardware. Hardware is important, of course. You need to have adequate RAM. You have to have a speedy processor. But if you spend $10,000 on a computer versus implementing best practices for technique, you're going to get the best bang for your buck in the technique column. So let's talk about hardware for a moment. The best hardware you get is really the newest, the latest, late generation processor, the fastest clock speed you can find. Now, Civil 3D isn't entirely multi-threaded. So if you get a machine with 16 processor cores, Civil 3D really makes use of one. Not to say that it doesn't make use of others as well. However, if you're not trying to spend the most money on hardware, buying a processor with 4 cores that has a faster clock speed, maybe 4.0, 4.6 gigahertz, 4-core is going to be better than a slower processor with more cores. When you're talking about RAM, first thing is you need enough. Autodesk's recommended guidelines for Civil 3D, I think, are 8 gigabytes. And depending on exactly what your usage of Civil 3D is, that may be enough. The larger the project, the bigger the files, the more RAM you're going to need. I generally recommend 16 gigabytes as a minimum. 48 gigabytes generally is overkill. 16 to 32 is sort of the sweet spot. But not all RAM is the same. I have a table on the bottom right of your screen there that shows you some different RAM speeds, and you'll notice the one at the top, they're all DDR3 RAM. The one at the top is 64 megabytes per second, but the bottom one is 12,800 megabytes per second. It's a much faster data transfer rate. So get enough RAM, but if you get the faster RAM, it's going to help you even more. Hard disk. I think most people are getting into the solid-state drives now, but that's one of the nice things you can do these days. The old-style hard disks are fine. You can get really large ones, and they're fairly cheap. And large, quick, solid-state drives are available now, and they're not even as expensive as they were a year ago. So getting a solid-state drive installed on your machine, installing Windows and Civil 3D onto that solid-state drive will give you really speedy startup times and really speedy data access. If you're opening files that are stored on the SSD, that's even better. Most of my customers have network drives, and they're opening files that are stored on the network. So the bottleneck there is in this case, the network. Graphics card. I get this question a lot. Do I need to get a gaming card? Do I need to get a really expensive graphics card? Civil 3D is this big piece of software. It is, but depending again how you use the product, you may not need the best graphics card. If you're doing a lot of rendering, a lot of orbiting, a lot of viewing in 3 dimensions, a powerful graphics card with lots of graphics RAM is going to be beneficial to you. If you spend most of your time zooming and panning in 2 dimensions, you're still going to want a reasonably powerful graphics card, but you certainly don't need to go to the next level. And the solid middle of the road workstation graphics card is going to be the one you want. It can be important to ensure that you get a graphics card and the driver from the certified list at Autodesk.com. The image on the bottom right of your screen where it says AMD FirePro, I just grabbed that arbitrarily from the Autodesk website. Essentially, Autodesk tests many of the graphics cards and their drivers with their Autodesk software. In this case, this particular one is recommended and certified for use with AutoCAD 2018. Now, Civil 3D is an AutoCAD product, so really as long as you get a graphics card that you can find that is recommended especially and certified, you should be good to go. Your bottleneck will likely not be a graphics problem. And that's hardware. All right, software, updates, service packs, hotfixes. There's one interesting sort of twist to our performance discussion here. I'm going to open this document for you. It's a web page. Back in October 11th, 2016, Autodesk released this document. It's called Civil 3D Performance Degradation. Autodesk were able to provide a single file hotfix for Civil 3D versions 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017. It's downloadable from this web page. It's called the Performance Repair. It replaces a single file on your Civil 3D system. Some people will see no benefit. I have customers, and I know some of my other network colleagues in the US who, after installing this hotfix, two things happened. Their drawing file size sometimes went from, in one example, 26 megabytes down to 3.5 megabytes. And their open time went from 3 minutes down to 20 seconds. Now, I can't say this is going to happen for you, because for some people, they don't have an issue on their machine. But definitely, some of my customers and some of the other colleagues that I know have had incredible success by installing this one thing. I know one customer that went from a 5-minute open file down to, I think it was 30 seconds. So this is one hotfix that I would highly recommend installing. Now I'm going to run a quick poll here. Give me 2 seconds while I select it. It has to do with service packs and hotfixes. All right, I'll launch the poll. Does your company have a person whose responsibility it is to ensure service packs and hotfixes are applied in a timely manner? Yes or no? I'm just curious. Do you have a person? Is it their job, or is it part of their job to manage this? A lot of these poll questions aren't, I'm curious, but a lot of them are really just to get you thinking about things. You know, it's a great idea to have somebody whose job it is, whose responsibility is to do this. All right, so you have 70% of people who voted. I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. So far, it's looking like about half and half. Okay, I'll close the polls in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Polls are closed. All right, so it's about half and half. Half the people have a dedicated person, the other people don't. Again, I'm just curious, and just to get you thinking, it's important to have someone up to date on this, because this particular hotfix was so helpful for so many people. Now, one interesting tidbit of information about this hotfix: the update needs to be implemented on every user's machine. The performance issue will return if a drawing has been opened and saved in Civil 3D that was not fixed. Autodesk has some words of advice on that same page to help you implement the fix. Okay, drivers. Make sure your drivers, if you have a certified graphics card, certified on the Autodesk.com website, they certify drivers as well. So make sure you're using the driver that Autodesk has certified. Hardware acceleration. This is a setting right inside AutoCAD. You can see where it is on my screen there. If you have a certified recommended graphics card and driver, generally your computer will perform best if this setting is left on. I have seen on occasion, sometimes, if you turn it off, your computer somehow performs better. Essentially, on versus off, you just pick one. Whatever gives you the best performance, use that one. Which one do you pick? Well, it just depends. Most people will say, well, it should be on. Yeah, that's true. It should be on. However, on occasion, turning it off just gives you better performance. So I'll let you be the judge of that. Give it a try. Antivirus. Maybe you use Norton. Maybe you use McAfee. Some antivirus software will scan DWG files and other Autodesk files as you open them, or even while they're open. And most antivirus softwares have the ability to create an exception. So excluding DWGs and other known Autodesk file extensions from your antivirus checking is definitely a prudent maneuver. So go to your Norton control panel or your McAfee control panel. Find the place where you can create exceptions, make an exception for file types like DWG, Microsoft Word, doc files, docx files. Make exceptions to those things, and the antivirus will not scan them when you open them or when you copy them. Windows settings. Most of us use arrow themes. We have these graduated switching from one window to another, or you have smooth fonts. There's various different settings inside Windows to make our user experience more pleasurable. But all of those things take up your system resources. So if you want the best and fastest computer, turn off arrow themes. Set Windows to its most basic visibility. And if you do, it will use up the least amount of computer resources. Of course, leaving more for your Autodesk products. Remove files and folders from the Windows Temp folder. So the Windows Temp folder is, here's the Autodesk document that talks about it. The Windows Temp folder is a place on your hard drive. If you open up Windows Explorer and type this, %temp%, it'll bring you to the right spot. So Autodesk and Windows and Outlook and pretty much every other software package writes files to this location. But not all of the files get deleted when your software closes. In fact, if your software crashes, none of the files get deleted. It's important to go to this location periodically. I probably do it 3 or 4 times a week. Most people that I talk to don't even know it exists. And so most people have never done it. I'm going to pop up another poll here just because I'm curious to see when you've done this. Okay, I'll pop up the poll. And just to satisfy my curiosity, please just let me know your answer to one of these options. I'll give you an example while you're voting. I went into a customer's office a couple of years ago. She was complaining about Civil 3D performance, saying it's crashing, it's being very, very slow. This is always the first thing I do. As a support professional, one of the very first things I do is I come in here and I get rid of every single file and folder in this Windows User Temp folder. And so my customer, this is the first thing I did. I restarted her machine. I got rid of all the files and folders within this temp folder. Restarted Civil 3D, and it was like night and day for her. She could not say thank you enough. Now, I'm not going to say you're going to get that type of performance increase immediately, but it certainly doesn't hurt, and in many cases, it's going to help you. If you find Civil 3D is crashing more than it should, get rid of all these things in that folder, and I think you'll be pleased. All right, looks like we have over 80% red. 42% say many months ago. 31 say, what is this folder? Okay, good. 10% done today, 17% last week. Good. So a lot of you definitely know what this is. I highly recommend going in there. The best time to erase these files is immediately after you restart your computer. There will be most files will be able to be deleted then. Some files will not be able to be deleted because they're in use by Windows or AutoCAD or whatever. So thank you. I will close that poll. A360, Autodesk 360 gets installed typically when you install any AutoCAD product. A360 is used by some of my customers. It's unused by some of my customers. Essentially, A360 is a place you can go. It's sort of like Google Drive or Sync. You can synchronize your online files stored at Autodesk.com with your hard drive. There's a way to disable A360. If you turn A360 off, you can get better performance. Now, it's nice to have on. For me, I have files on Autodesk 360 and I synchronize all the time, so I can't really turn mine off. But if you find you're not using it, disabling it will give you a little bit of performance boost. Customization. This is one thing that's really great about AutoCAD products. And it's one thing that's sort of not so great about AutoCAD products. It's great because we can personalize our software. We can tell the software where to go to find plot files, support files, line type files, that kind of thing. A lot of times people do customization properly, and that's fantastic. Sometimes people customize their AutoCAD interface in a way that can cause problems. And so this is another one thing that I find as a support individual. One of the first things I check up on. When someone's having issues, I generally say, reset AutoCAD to its out-of-the-box state, and then we can go ahead and continue troubleshooting. And a lot of times, performance issues are purely because you customize in a certain manner. If you customize in a different way, it'll help out a lot. Now I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. We're talking about customization and hardware and software and techniques. I'm going to show you a lot of information here today in the next 40 minutes or so. But it's not going to be an exhaustive list. And you might not fully grasp all of the techniques and ideas that I'm about to show you. Feel free after the webcast, if you need more information or if you need help to implement some of the ideas that we're presenting, feel free to contact me or Richard or Dave. You're going to see our emails at the end of this webinar, or your Cancel or SolidCAD sales rep. And we'll be more than happy to, if we need to, come into your office and perform an assessment or give you some training or otherwise help you out. We're there to make sure that you guys can do your jobs. All right, next, AutoCAD settings. I'm going to show you, I don't know, maybe a dozen different settings here that are just going to help. Inside AutoCAD, there's something called background printing. You can plot or you can publish in the background. Turning them off and allowing Civil 3D or AutoCAD to plot and print normally typically is faster. Preview selection. Right? When you have a line selected in AutoCAD and you use the properties palette to cycle through different line weights or colors, it gives you a preview of your selection before you actually commit. Again, that takes up a little bit of your computer resources, so turning this off may help. Tooltips. Turning them off will help a little bit as well. I like to have my tooltips on. Sometimes I don't know what all the buttons mean necessarily, so I want to hover on a button and get a tooltip. But if you don't need tooltips at all, feel free to turn them off, and you're going to get a little performance boost. Now, that said, we're talking about Civil 3D here. And tooltips are extremely helpful in Civil 3D because you want to stop moving your cursor and you want to find out, what station your cursor is at, or what offset, or what's the elevation of your surface where your cursor exists. You need to have tooltips turned on to make that happen. So I'm not saying you need to turn off or set all these settings the way I'm suggesting. It's just when they're turned off, when they're set the way I'm telling you, you are going to get a little performance boost. So it's up to you to decide, do I need this setting or not? Line weight display. I like to have line weight display turned on personally because I like the way it looks. But it does take up some resources on my computer, so turning your line weights off is going to help. Windows compatibility. When you right-click your Civil 3D desktop icon, there's this compatibility tab. Most of my customers don't have this employed, but you see where it says run this program in compatibility mode 4, and then you can choose a different operating system. Some of my customers have that turned on for various reasons. Turning it off will give you better performance. This one I just found the other day, and quite honestly, I'm not entirely sure what this is. I found this particular statement on an Autodesk document on the knowledge base that says, how you can get better performance out of AutoCAD. It's called the Windows Presentation Foundation Font Cache. You can go ahead and read that paragraph, but essentially, if you turn this service off, you can see a small increase in performance. Now, I've said that a few times today. I've said you'll see a small increase in performance, but guess what? If you implement 20 or 30 different settings, those small increases may add up into a noticeable increase. Quick properties. My image there has a block selected. When I select the block, Quick Properties window pops up, says this is a block, here's the layer, here's the name of that block, etc. Again, that takes up a few system resources. Turning off Quick Properties will give you a little better performance. save %, incremental save %. This can be set from 0, I think, up to 90. If it's set to 0, every time you click the Save button, AutoCAD performs a full save, meaning every bit, every byte gets saved. If you set save % to a value of 50, that's 50%. When you click Save, only the things that have changed since the last full save get saved. So, for example, if a full save takes 10 seconds, if I set save % to, let's say, 50%, and I just add a few lines to my drawing, the next time I click Save, it's only going to be about a half second or less, because the only thing it's saving is just the 2 or 3 lines that I've created. Now, what this does to your file size is it makes your file size increase. So if you have a 10 megabyte file and you set save % to 50%, as you add data and save, your file size gets bigger, up to 50% larger. So that 10 megabyte file will eventually turn into a 15 megabyte file. Once it gets past 15, because of that 50%, AutoCAD says, oh, it's more than 50% now, I have to do a full save, and then your file size will go back to 10 megabytes. So it doesn't really affect your usability performance, but it does affect file size. Proxy graphics. Civil 3D contains objects such as surfaces and alignments and corridors. When this file is opened up in plain Jane vanilla AutoCAD, those things are referred to as proxy images or proxy graphics, because AutoCAD essentially doesn't speak Civil 3D. So if you set proxy graphics to a value of 1 inside Civil 3D and then save your drawing, those proxy images are essentially stored inside the drawing, making the drawing a little bit bigger. But it makes it so that vanilla AutoCAD users can open up your file, see the civil objects. Setting proxy graphics to 0 is the most efficient use. I would recommend that. If you have AutoCAD users in your office, you can install the freely distributable Civil Object Enabler that will enable the Civil 3D objects. So vanilla AutoCAD people will actually be able to see your objects. This one I've mentioned to a few of my customers, and most people don't know what this is. It's a performance monitor right inside AutoCAD. If you are experiencing performance issues, slowness, opening files, slowness, regenning, what have you, if you feel it's slower than it really should be, what you can do is you can press the start-stop button. This is called PM toggle. That's the command. If you like to type your things in AutoCAD, PM toggle is the command you want to type. Start recording. Record a minute or two, not too much more, of what you perceive as poor performance. When you stop the recording, a case will be submitted directly to Autodesk with the file that you just recorded to give them some ammunition on how to maybe troubleshoot your particular issue. So you need to be able to submit cases to Autodesk. So if you've never submitted a technical support case with Autodesk, you need to get set up with that first to be able to use this properly. But it's the performance monitor. The website, if you download this PowerPoint, click on that PM toggle button, it'll give you all the information you need how to use it. Raster percent, raster thresholds, I haven't actually used these settings too much myself personally. You set them to a lower number, it will just increase your performance, assuming you have raster images installed and attached to your AutoCAD files. All right, we're about halfway through the webinar. Got a couple more things to do here. Most of my time is actually going to be spent on techniques, so I'll go through these a little bit quick here. Network. Most of us are on a local area network. Sometimes your IT professionals can implement maybe a Windows setting or a Windows Server setting that introduces some network latency. And so sometimes your slowdowns are due to just loading files on the network. I had a customer who took 20 seconds to move a Civil 3D profile PVI. I took that file, loaded it right on her computer, and it took 2 seconds. So I'm not necessarily saying you should be copying files from your server to your local machine because typically they don't get backed up. However, in her case, this made a huge difference. You know, it took 20 seconds. She opened the file directly on the T drive. It took 20 seconds to do this one thing. I copied the file locally. It then took 2. So her network was experiencing some latency in that case. Sometimes we open files over the wide area network, or WAN. If you don't have a screaming fast wide area network, you'll definitely see some slowdowns there. WAN accelerators are available, not from Autodesk. They're a piece of hardware that your IT professional installs that can speed up your WAN use. File replication, right? So instead of you opening a file, if you work in Vancouver and you're trying to open a file that's physically located in Calgary over the wide area network, that can introduce some latency. So Windows has file replication, Autodesk Vault has file replication. Essentially what happens is the files get copied to your local server and you're opening them locally. When you make a change, the replication software updates the Calgary copy of the file in this case. All right, technique. This will be sort of the bulk and where you get the most bang for your buck in terms of Civil 3D performance. So purge is not a Civil 3D command, it's a typical AutoCAD command. But 2 of these things are fairly common in causing slowdowns in your machines. Reg apps, registered applications. If you use Lisp files that have embedded reg apps, sometimes you can have hundreds or even thousands of these tiny little reg apps floating around in your drawing. They don't they're not problematic typically unless you have way too many of them. And how do you tell if you have way too many of them? Well, just use the purge command and make sure you purge the registered applications or reg apps. Annotation scales. This isn't as much of a problem now as it was a few years ago when annotation scales first came out, especially with XREFs. You would find that you have hundreds or even thousands of annotation scales in your drawing, and the more annotation scales you have, the slower your drawing is going to be. Autodesk has some tools to remove annotation scales from a single drawing or even a folder's worth of drawing. They also have a tool that does that for reg apps as well. In later versions of AutoCAD, 16, 17, 18, it's not as much of an issue. But older drawings, they may still contain those reg apps and annotation scales. So you're definitely going to want to get rid of the ones you don't need. DGN data. In my image in the bottom there, it says orphaned data. That's what DGN is. DGN is microstation files, right? So if you're opening a file that originated with microstation, there's going to be some orphan data in there. The more orphan data you have in a drawing, the slower it's going to be. Zero length objects. If you draw a line, you pick one point, you pick that same point for the end point of the line has zero length. It's really, for the most part, not usable to us. And so Purge will look for those and erase those as well as empty text objects. It is possible to create a piece of text that has no text in it. So it doesn't really make sense to have it in the drawing, so that's why it's available for Purge. The AutoCAD recover command. Occasionally, a file will get somewhat corrupted, but it doesn't necessarily manifest itself in terms of, well, you can't open the file. Sometimes drawing corruption is fairly subtle, like a slowdown in your drawing, or maybe a style doesn't quite look right, or something like that. Recover command is a fantastic command to use. Make sure you use the recover command on your XREFs as well. If you have a drawing with a few XREFs, really, you want to recover them all. And so AutoCAD actually has, I don't have it listed here, but AutoCAD has a command called recover all, if you like to type in AutoCAD. It will recover the current file and any files that are XREF to it. Okay. Since Civil 3D doesn't really make the best use of your multiple core processor, you can have 10 drawings open, right? Start Civil 3D once in the morning, open 10 drawing files. Really, Civil 3D is going to make use of one processor. But if instead of opening all 10 of those drawings in one instance of Civil 3D, if you open 2 or 3 different instances of Civil 3D and open the drawings that way, you are going to get a performance boost because every separate instance of Civil 3D that you launch, Windows can optimize the core use. So, each instance of Civil 3D will use its own core, essentially. Windows decides what core to use, I think. But opening multiple instances of Civil 3D, each with one drawing, will be able to use your RAM and will be able to use the cores more effectively than opening multiple DWGs in the single instance of Civil 3D. Civil 3D styles. Sometimes people like to freeze layers, and that's okay. If you have a surface, let's say, that displays contours and pin lines and points, if you freeze the layers, that data is still part of the drawing. Your drawing size will be a little larger and it'll actually be a little bit slower. If instead you choose to use styles that turn the components off, forget about layer freezing, we're using a style that turns things off, that will give you a bit of a performance boost, and it'll actually make your drawing a little bit smaller as well. So instead of freezing layers, consider using no display styles. File locations. Talked about this briefly. Save files locally. You're going to get a performance boost, but depending on how your company is organized, generally frowned upon to copy a file from your server, work on it locally, and then copy it back. I mean, what happens if somebody else opens the file? Well, now you're going to have trouble. But if you use file replication software or Autodesk Vault, that's what happens. Right? So the way Autodesk Vault works, the files are stored not in your server, but in the actual Autodesk Vault itself. When you go to open a file from Vault, you check it out. The file gets copied to your local machine, but the file gets locked with Autodesk Vault, so nobody will be able to open it. When you're finished, you save the file, you check it back into Vault, and your changes update the Vault. And so this is really nice. I've had some customers who have experienced some real slowdowns across their wide area network, and by implementing Vault, the files are going to be stored locally as you work on them. It's much faster to work on than working over the wide area network. Even faster than working over a local area network. Avoid legacy features, one of which that I can think of right now is point clouds. Civil 3D 2016 and 2017 and 2018 have a new point cloud engine, right? Inside Civil 3D, let's open up Civil 3D for you here. Here's Civil 3D, here's the prospector. We have a point cloud thing here in the prospector. Okay, that's a legacy point cloud. It's here just to accommodate those users who have used these in the past, but don't use them anymore. Right? Point clouds are handled now in the Insert tab. You want to attach a point cloud from here. You have to use a recap file. So if you have a point cloud that's LAS or some kind of other type of point cloud, it needs to be converted to an Autodesk recap file, RCP, and then attached to Civil 3D. The performance of these point clouds is so much better than the legacy point clouds here in the prospector, and there's other benefits as well. We can talk about those offline if you want some more information about point clouds. Style optimization. In my images at the bottom, I have two profile views. The one on the right has the grid clipped. The one on the left, not clipped. Some of my customers like the clipping look for profile views or cross-section views. Understand that when you clip the grid, it takes system resources to do it. And so having them look like the image on the left is the best practice in this case. Two more things. Simplify data and drawing organization. Let's just jump into simplified data. Large surfaces. Right? When you have a text file that has 1 million points in it, what you don't want to do is what I have pictured. Insert points from file. Right? That creates Civil 3D COGO points. You might think, well, I need the points, right? Well, what do you need points for? You need points typically for three things. Surface creation, symbology, like trees and manholes, and line work connection. If you need your points for symbology and line work connection, well, yes, you do need to import them. But typically, a big file like this with 1 million points in it is probably a scan file or a LiDAR file. And those don't have descriptions. So really, the only reason you're using LiDAR data is for surface creation. You're not using it for line work creation. So there's better ways to create surfaces from that type of data. You make a surface directly from the point file. So you want to avoid importing points in that manner with a huge file like that. Data clip boundary. All right, I'm going to switch to Civil 3D here. We've got a drawing. Looks like this. Let's say I only want to keep this much of it. Now, what you could do is you could create this surface first, then create an outer boundary. This particular surface has 2.5 million points in it. If I create an outer boundary, all I'm doing is limiting the display of the surface. Those 2.5 million points are still part of this drawing file. When you go to add a boundary, one of the boundaries is called a data clip boundary. And so if I were to implement that on this data set, instead of having 2.5 million points in my drawing, the only points that would exist are the ones within this rectangle. Maybe it's only 150,000 points. And so when you have this large text file with millions of points in it, use that data clip boundary if you don't need all of the points. If you just want a small corridor or a small window, use that data clip boundary. Data decimation. So you've been given a point file with 80 million points in it. Do you need 80 million points? Well, that's for you to decide. Most times you don't, because those 80 million points probably, some of them are overhead power lines or signs or trees or things that are not ground. So you need to get rid of those things. All you want are ground points. So maybe that brings the 80 million points down to 20 million. All right, that's still quite a lot for Civil 3D. It can probably do it, but it's still a lot of points for Civil 3D to handle. It's very likely that those 20 million remaining points are very close to each other, maybe a couple centimeters, right? Traditionally, surveyors will walk 5, 10, maybe 20 meters in between shots. But the data that we get now from LiDAR and from scans can be millimeters or centimeters apart. But typically, we don't need that kind of density. So, further decimate it by removing points down to something that's usable. So instead of 20 million points, maybe we can get away with 2 million. And that should be no problem for Civil 3D. The two images I have shown here, the top one called point removal, that's something called simplify surface inside Civil 3D. There's a command for surfaces. You need to build the surface first before it can be simplified, and that's not always what you want. Ideally, you want to decimate this data before it ever comes into Civil 3D. So your LiDAR provider, your scanner provider, or this software I have linked here called VR Mesh can be used to decimate the data before it comes into Civil 3D. Now the image I have on the bottom is part of the wizard, point cloud to surface inside Civil 3D. And this value right here, I'm going to circle in a second, oops, right there, that's the way we can decimate the points before a surface is made. The bigger that number, the further apart the points are when the surface gets created. So if you have a point cloud and a recap point cloud inside your drawing, to make a surface from it, use the Surface from Point Cloud tool. And you decimate using that number. Now this one might not be entirely possible for everybody, but if you can avoid making a tin surface and instead use a grid surface, right, because there's two different ways to make a surface in Civil 3D. I'm just going to show you quickly here. Surface, create surface from tin. Actually, I'll go to create surface here. What type of surface? Is it grid or tin? Right. Tin surface is what we're all used to. Grid surface is a different type of surface. Now, the reason I say we can't all use this is, well, it's just not a tin. All the points on your surface will be gridded on a 2-meter grid or a 5-meter grid, and that's where the points will lie. And so you're not going to get the exact copy of your tin. But if it makes sense to use a grid surface, they use 1/6 of the memory of a tin surface. Tiling surfaces sometimes is required, right? Maybe I do need those 20 million points, but I find that the performance is sort of lacking. So in this case, I'll split it up into 12 different surfaces, each, about 1.5 million points each. And so each of those 12 squares will represent a unique surface. Sometimes you just need to do that. If you need all 20 or 30 million points, it can be pretty slow inside Civil 3D to make a single surface that large. Sometimes you need to tile it. Corridors, assembly frequency. If you've done corridors, you know that you can set the assembly frequency to whatever you like. The more dense you set your frequency, the more accurate and the better looking your corridor, but the worse it's going to perform. I like to use 20 meters along tangents, 5 meters along curves. That's sort of a number that I like to use. It gives me a good balance between performance and surface and corridor accuracy. That's not to say that I don't sometimes need to go a bit more dense than that. Sometimes I do. But that's a variable. When you're performing preliminary design, you don't generally need a super dense corridor. So during prelim design, you can set your frequency to something high, like 50 meters or 100 meters. Corridor rebuild times might be 5 seconds or 3 seconds. Then when you go to detailed design, you're almost done. You want your daylight line to look as good as it can. You want everything to look the best. That last day, go ahead and set this to something more dense. Accept that it's going to take 30 or 40 seconds maybe to rebuild a big corridor. But you might only have to rebuild it a couple of times at that stage of design. You can split your corridor up into multiple regions. Now, I've got the same assembly set for this one corridor, but I've split it up into multiple regions so that I can turn them all off except for the region I'm currently working in. Rebuild times are going to be faster. Orbit times in the object viewer are going to be faster. So even if your corridor doesn't really need multiple regions, you can implement it just so that you can turn the rest off. Code set styles. Here's the poll. I'm going to run one more poll, and let's just see what you think about this one. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this question, but please go ahead and answer this one. Have you ever experienced performance issues viewing a corridor in the object viewer? I'm going to say that, there's the people. One person says no. That's pretty much what I expect. Oh, no more than one. The vast majority of people have indeed experienced performance issues with the corridor in the object viewer. Now, I'm going to show you something that hopefully will just blow your mind. And when I discovered that I could do this, it basically made it so that I can use the object viewer with the corridor. All right, that's good. I'm going to close the poll. I'm going to do a quick demo here in Civil 3D. Here's my corridor. I'll look at it in the object viewer. Hopefully this translates to you quite well. I'm going to pick and drag, and you're going to see that it's quite slow. It's quite slow on my end. It's probably quite slow on your end. That's what most people have come to expect from corridors. So I'll close this. All I'm going to do is change the code set style to some style that I know works well. Same corridor, just a different code set style. There we go, object viewer. Now, it's probably not as obvious on your end, but it's very obvious on mine. This code set style has made a world of difference with the performance of this corridor. Now, the difference is, you see there's nothing underneath the top. All I'm showing is the top of the corridor, nothing underneath. That's it. All right, moving right along, turn off Rebuild Automatic on your corridor. Every time you do something, it's going to rebuild. If you don't need that, just turn it off. Simplify your data, contours, and feature lines. Go ahead and use the weed command. We don't always need all the vertices on these things. Map trim. If you have a ton of data and there's a rectangle that you need and you want to get rid of everything outside that rectangle, we all know the AutoCAD trim command, but map trim is a really cool tool that makes this work really easy, really fast. Level of detail. Big surfaces. Right? Level of detail is a setting inside Civil 3D. You'll see the tin on the left and the tin on the right. It's the same tin, but the one on the left looks like there's fewer lines than the one on the right. That's because level of detail is turned on. As you zoom in, more detail is presented to you. Makes it faster. Basically, this 2.5 million point surface I can look at in the object viewer with level of detail turned on. If I turned off level of detail, I would probably crash in the object viewer. You have the option to save data references inside the drawing or not. If you save them inside the drawing, the file size will be bigger, but it'll open faster. If you choose not to save DREFs inside the drawing, when you open, it'll have to go back to the original drawing and verify, validate that file. But your drawing file will be smaller. Paper space. The fewer paper space tabs you have, the fewer viewports you have, the better. If you need to put 30 tabs, each tab having 10 viewports, that's sort of a recipe for slowness. So try to limit the number of tabs and viewports you have. Raster images. Now you might have been given a 300 megabyte raster image. Do you need it all? Maybe. But if you don't need every last pixel, go ahead and just downsample it. Instead of 300 megabytes, make it 10 megabytes or 5 megabytes. If it makes sense to do so. And we don't always need all those pixels inside the drawing. If you don't need them all, use Photoshop or some other kind of image editor to just downsample it. Now, the last section here in the last few minutes is drawing organization. Liberal use of XREFs and DREFs are going to help your performance for sure. So here's an example of a quasi-typical scenario. A CAD line work drawing, nothing Civil 3D, just AutoCAD line work, XREF into my print sheet. Now, data refed into the print sheet are the survey, my surface drawing, alignments, profiles, corridors. You did know that corridors can be derefed now, did you not? Civil 3D 27 allows data referencing corridors. Excuse me. So you can deref these things right into the print sheets. Sometimes you need to have multiple alignment sheets or multiple corridors or even multiple survey files. Depending on the size and complexity of your project, you may need to split up your files even more than what I've shown. The last couple of slides are just some generic organizational tips that I have, right? If you're trying to calculate volumes, there's really no need to calculate volumes in your design file, right? So typically, you'll have a corridor and you want to calculate earthworks volumes from your corridor. You can do it right inside the corridor file, but the more volume surfaces you have in the drawing, the slower your drawing is going to be. And volume surfaces are quite heavy. Take your existing ground surface and your corridor surface and essentially triple that. That's what gives you your volume surface. And there's really no need for those to be in your design drawing because really all you're doing is calculating volume. So deref your corridors and maybe some grading into a volumes drawing and then perform the volumes in there. Pipes, here's another way. CAD line work gets XREF'd. Your existing ground surface, your corridor, your grading get deref'd, and there's your pipes drawing. Again, these are not hard and fast rules, but it works for most of my customers in one flavor or another. Cross sections. A lot of people will put their sections directly in the corridors file. Now that we have the ability to deref our surfaces, our alignments, and our corridors, we can have sheets specifically set up just for sections. If you need 20 paper space sheets for sections, make it its own drawing, data reference everything in. That'll leave your design file as clean as it can be without cluttering it up with sections. And that's pretty much it for the Civil 3D Performance webinar. I thank you very much for attending. Thanks for satisfying my curiosity by answering the polls. My name is Matt Colbert. Your answerers today are Richard Johnson and David Hill. Feel free to go to our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. Probably not today, but in the next couple of days we should have this video uploaded so that you can watch it later. And as always, when you have questions, when you have issues, if you have a particular problem with Civil 3D or any other Autodesk software for that matter, feel free to contact any one of us three, specified here by our emails, or your Autodesk or SolidCAD sales rep, and they'll get in touch with us, and we can definitely help you out with performance issues or just help me set up Civil 3D. So on behalf of Richard and David and the staff here at Cancel, my name is Matt Kohlberg. Thank you very much for attending.